Sometimes, in the quiet moments between waking and sleep, or in the middle of a crowded room where everyone seems to move on some invisible rhythm, you might feel a subtle but undeniable strangeness. It's a sense that the world around you is somehow distant, or that you yourself are watching it all from a distance, as though you're a spectator in your own life. You might look in the mirror and notice the reflection isn't quite you, or at least not the you that feels alive and real. This is more than fleeting daydreaming or fatigue. It has a name: depersonalization, and understanding it requires stepping into some unusual territory where psychology brushes up against philosophy and where questions about consciousness can feel like they stretch to infinity. Depersonalization is a dissociative experience, a kind of temporary disconnection between the self and the body or mind. People often describe it as feeling unreal, detached, or like they're living in a dream. Their thoughts might feel mechanical, their movements automatic, their emotions muted, or their surroundings strangely flat. There's an odd paradox here. You know, intellectually, that the world is solid and real, that you exist. Yet the experience feels as if reality itself has shifted, as if you've stepped out of its normal flow. It can be unsettling, but it's more common than you might think. A significant portion of people will experience depersonalization at some point in their lives, often triggered by stress, trauma, fatigue, or intense existential questioning. Interestingly, the sensation of unreality doesn't always require clinical conditions. Even philosophers and scientists have described moments where consciousness itself seems to flicker, where the usual sense of being anchored in a body or timeline slips. Some call this existential unease, a creeping realization that the world, your sense of self, or the relationship between the two, might not be as straightforward as it feels. It's the subtle anxiety that perhaps the narrative you've been living is just a construct, a pattern your mind interprets as life, while underneath it all, you're floating in something much larger or entirely different than you can perceive. One way to explore why this feeling arises is through the lens of the brain itself. Neuroscience tells us that our sense of self is a constantly updating construct. Your brain integrates sensory inputs: sight, sound, touch, balance, proprioception, along with memory and emotion, to produce a coherent experience of being you. When this integration falters even slightly, the sense of self can fragment. You may feel as if your thoughts are not entirely your own, or that your body is moving independently of your will. In some ways, depersonalization is a glitch in this internal simulation, a moment when the system running your conscious experience briefly fails to convince you of its seamlessness. The comparison to simulation isn't coincidental. Modern science and philosophy often entertain the idea that consciousness might be a kind of virtual reality, generated by the mind to make sense of inputs from the world. Simulation theory, popularized in recent decades by thinkers like Nick Bostrom, suggests that everything you perceive could, in principle, be an artificial construct. Even if this is just a thought experiment, it resonates with the lived experience of depersonalization. When your sense of reality wavers, it can feel as if you've stepped outside the program, witnessing the machinery behind your life. There's a peculiar beauty in that. For a brief moment, you realize that reality, so often taken for granted, is a delicate tapestry woven by perception, expectation, and memory, and sometimes those threads loosen. Depersonalization can also be closely linked to stress and trauma. When the mind is overwhelmed, it can employ detachment as a protective mechanism. By creating distance between you and your immediate experience, it gives you space to process or survive extreme emotional pressure. In this sense, the feeling of unreality is not a flaw, but a strategy, albeit one that can be frightening when it happens unexpectedly or persistently. The challenge arises when the mind's defense mechanism outstays its welcome, leaving you in a semi-permanent state of observation, unable to fully inhabit your own life. Yet not all moments of not feeling real are pathological. Some arise naturally from reflection or curiosity. Philosophers have long asked questions like, what does it mean to exist? How do we know that the world is real? What is the self, and where does it end? These inquiries can produce sensations that mirror depersonalization, though they are triggered not by trauma but by contemplation. Think of standing on the edge of a vast canyon, staring at stars, or watching a city from a high rooftop at night. The scale of the world, the complexity of experience, can momentarily make your own existence feel small, fragile, or dreamlike. There's a thin line between awe and the eerie sense that perhaps you are not as anchored in reality as you imagine. Another layer to consider is the subjective perception of time. During depersonalization, seconds can stretch or contract. Moments may feel like they hover indefinitely or slip away before you can grasp them. Your memory of recent events might feel unreal, as if belonging to someone else. Neuroscientists believe this occurs because the brain's temporal processing, how it sequences events and anchors them to a personal narrative, becomes disrupted. When time feels distorted, your sense of continuity, which is central to feeling real, falters. You are left floating, not quite in the past, present, or future, but somewhere in between. Technology and media can also play subtle roles in shaping these sensations. Virtual realities, highly immersive video games, and even constant streams of information can encourage the mind to question its own interface with the world. When the brain becomes accustomed to navigating multiple layers of perception, the boundary between the constructed and the authentic can blur. For some, this may trigger mild depersonalization, a fleeting sense that the world is a simulation, or that their self is only partially engaged in it. Underlying all of this is a simple yet profound truth. Our brains are storytellers. We interpret raw sensory input and package it into narratives that feel like continuous life. Most of the time, these narratives are seamless. You move, you think, you feel, you exist without question. But occasionally, the seams appear. The narrative unravels just enough to remind you that what you take for granted, your existence, your perceptions, your sense of being, is not guaranteed to feel this coherent. And when that happens, the world can feel unreal, and so can you. It's also worth noting that there is a paradoxical richness to these experiences. The very moments that make us question our reality can expand our awareness. They can heighten empathy, sharpen perception, and open the door to contemplations that are impossible in ordinary consciousness. By briefly stepping outside the flow of automatic living, you glimpse the fragility and creativity of your mind, and the delicate, intricate structure of the reality you inhabit. In the next steps, we'll explore the various ways the mind produces these sensations, how simulation theory resonates with them, and why existential unease is a natural, even necessary, companion to consciousness itself. But even now, as you consider the unsettling feeling of watching yourself from a distance, it's worth acknowledging one thing. That sensation, however disquieting, is itself a profound signal that your mind is aware, curious, and alive. You may feel unreal, yet the awareness of that unreality confirms that something deeply real is happening inside you. Something undeniably human. To understand why the sense of unreality emerges, we need to look deeper at the architecture of the brain and the delicate interplay that sustains the experience of being alive. Your sense of self, the you that experiences, reacts, and remembers, is not housed in a single location. It is distributed across networks, each performing specialized functions, yet all working together to create a coherent consciousness. When one part of this system falters, even temporarily, the seamless illusion of reality can fray. The prefrontal cortex, often called the brain's executive center, plays a central role in maintaining self-awareness and regulating thought. It evaluates experiences, plans future actions, and continuously updates your mental model of the world. Damage, overactivation, or unusual activity in this area can lead to feelings of detachment. For example, some studies using functional imaging have shown that during episodes of depersonalization, the prefrontal cortex appears to suppress activity in the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotion. The result is a mind that perceives the world accurately but feels emotionally muted, as if the vividness of life has been filtered out. You know things exist, but the sense of living in them is temporarily suspended. The parietal lobe, another critical region, integrates sensory input to create a sense of the body in space. When its functioning is altered through fatigue, stress, or certain neurological conditions, the experience of owning a body can weaken. Your hands may feel unfamiliar, your movements slightly disconnected from intention. This sensory dissonance can produce the eerie sensation of watching yourself act rather than acting yourself. In a sense, your brain constructs a virtual body in real time, and depersonalization is a momentary glitch in that construction, revealing the machinery behind your sense of embodiment. Even more subtle is the role of interoception, the perception of internal bodily states. Your brain is constantly monitoring your heartbeat, breathing, digestion, and temperature, integrating these signals into your self-awareness. When interoception is disrupted, the body can feel strange or hollow. Breathing might seem mechanical, the heart a distant drum. Psychologists describe this as a dissociation between cognition and sensation. The mind knows the body exists, yet it feels like a phantom or a prop. The more acute your awareness of this dissociation, the more the world itself can feel unreal. Stress is a powerful trigger because it amplifies these underlying vulnerabilities. Cortisol, the stress hormone, floods the system during periods of high pressure. High cortisol levels affect the hippocampus, which is central to memory formation and spatial orientation, and the amygdala, which regulates fear and emotional salience. This chemical cascade can create an internal environment where the usual coherence of experience is temporarily disrupted. The world may seem dreamlike, or you may feel like a distant observer of yourself. Over time, repeated stress can train the brain to habitually dissociate, making depersonalization more frequent. The brain's predictive nature adds another layer of complexity. Our minds do not passively record reality. They constantly generate predictions and compare them with incoming sensory data. When the predictions are accurate, life feels seamless. When they fail, even slightly, the brain signals that something is off. In depersonalization, the predictive mechanisms of self-awareness may detect a mismatch between expected internal states and actual experience. You know your hand is moving, but it feels unnatural. You know your thoughts are yours, yet they feel distant. That mismatch generates the uncanny, almost glitchy feeling of being unreal. From a psychological standpoint, depersonalization can be both frightening and fascinating. People often describe a dual awareness. Part of them recognizes that the sensation is temporary or even protective, while another part is caught in the intensity of the experience, convinced something is wrong. This duality highlights a paradox. The very awareness that allows you to observe unreality confirms that you are conscious. You may feel unreal, yet the reflection on that feeling proves that a self is present, actively processing the world. Simulation theory intersects with this perfectly. If the brain is a sophisticated predictive engine constructing the experience of reality, then moments of depersonalization are glimpses behind the curtain. The world feels like code, yourself like an avatar, because your mind is briefly aware of its own construction. Philosophers and cognitive scientists argue that consciousness itself might be a simulation in the sense that it is a dynamic model of reality, continually updated to keep you alive and functional. From this perspective, depersonalization is less an error and more a sudden awareness of the simulation. Interestingly, meditation and contemplative practices can intentionally trigger similar experiences. Long periods of focused attention, sensory withdrawal, or deep reflection can create mild depersonalization-like states. Practitioners describe a feeling of being both inside and outside themselves simultaneously, observing thought and sensation without attachment. While stressful depersonalization can feel alienating, these intentional states reveal that the mind is capable of observing its own processes without panic, providing a subtle bridge to understanding why moments of unreality occur naturally. Dreams, too, offer a parallel. In REM sleep, consciousness operates in a semi-detached way. Your brain generates a complex simulation of reality, yet the body is largely immobile. Some theorists suggest that depersonalization is like a fleeting REM state intruding into waking life. The mind temporarily inhabits a version of reality where sensory input is dampened and self-awareness is fragmented. The dreamlike quality of these experiences can be unsettling precisely because the mind is awake enough to recognize that it is awake. You are conscious of unreality, trapped between the dream state and waking life. Even language struggles to capture depersonalization. We describe it using metaphors, feeling like a spectator, like a ghost, like a robot. But the words can never fully convey the texture of the experience, the slight wrongness of movement, the muted colors of perception, the hollow resonance of time. This linguistic inadequacy mirrors the neurological one. The brain is designed to construct reality, not to explain what happens when that construction falters. We stumble toward meaning with phrases and similes, but the raw experience exists beyond narrative. As the layers accumulate, the neurological mechanisms, the chemical triggers, the predictive computations, the psychological overlays, the philosophical resonance, you can begin to see depersonalization not as a flaw, but as a window into the architecture of consciousness itself, revealing the delicate scaffolding that holds the world and self together. And when that scaffolding briefly loosens, the sensation of unreality, while disorienting, becomes a powerful reminder of the extraordinary complexity and fragility of human experience. When you begin to feel unreal, it's not just your brain playing tricks. It's your consciousness nudging you toward questions that humans have been grappling with for millennia. Why am I here? What does it mean to exist? Is the world outside truly as solid as it seems? Or is it something more malleable, more abstract, more imagined? These are the questions at the heart of existential philosophy, and they resonate profoundly with the unsettling sensations of depersonalization. Existential thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus argued that humans are uniquely aware of their own existence, and that awareness comes with a kind of unavoidable tension. Unlike other creatures, we can step back and observe ourselves, imagine our deaths, and question the nature of reality. This self-reflective capability allows for creativity, empathy, and profound insight. But it also exposes us to a peculiar anxiety. Depersonalization can be thought of as a visceral manifestation of that anxiety. When your sense of self temporarily loosens, you experience firsthand the fragility of your existence and the constructed nature of reality. It's as if philosophy has been embodied in sensation. Consider the sensation itself. You might be walking down a familiar street and suddenly it feels unreal. Colors appear muted, sounds oddly distant. Your own movements mechanical. You intellectually know that the pavement, the buildings, the people, and your body all exist, but the experience tells a different story. Philosophers would argue that this is the mind confronting the contingency of existence, that all the objects and experiences you take for granted are not self-evident truths, but constructs of perception and interpretation. When those constructs falter, even briefly, the world appears strange, dreamlike, and distant. Simulation theory offers another perspective on why these sensations can be so jarring. Imagine, for a moment, that everything you perceive, the sights, the sounds, the textures, even your thoughts, are outputs of an underlying computational system, generating a coherent experience of reality. Under normal circumstances, this system runs smoothly, and you are fully immersed in the simulation. Depersonalization can feel like a temporary crash or debug mode. You become aware of the machinery, the code, the hidden processes that ordinarily remain invisible. Your body, your mind, your surroundings, everything feels like a construct, because in a sense, you are briefly observing the simulation from the inside out. The philosophical implications are profound. If consciousness is a kind of simulation, a self-contained model of reality designed to interpret sensory inputs and guide action, then every moment of depersonalization is a glimpse behind the curtain. You sense that your reality, and even your own self, is a delicate orchestration of processes, patterns, and predictions. You feel like a character in a story, yet paradoxically, you are the storyteller. The unsettling feeling is a signal, not a failure. It tells you that consciousness is both powerful and fragile, capable of constructing a vivid world, yet always one misalignment away from revealing its own artifice. Existential unease often arises alongside these experiences because humans crave coherence and meaning. When depersonalization strips away the familiar anchors, the emotional resonance of a touch, the immediacy of a thought, the solidity of a landscape, you confront a profound question. If these things can feel unreal, what, if anything, can be trusted? Existentialists suggest that the discomfort itself is part of life's truth. Awareness of the void, recognition of impermanence, and even fleeting feelings of unreality are not pathological by themselves. They are intrinsic to consciousness and our drive to seek meaning. This is why depersonalization, despite its eerie quality, is sometimes described as a gift by those who experience it intentionally, such as in meditation or deep reflection. By temporarily stepping outside the ordinary flow of life, you witness the scaffolding of your own perception. You see how thought, memory, emotion, and bodily sensation are woven together to create a coherent narrative of self. In a sense, the mind is giving you a backstage tour. You glimpse the hidden mechanisms behind your reality, and in doing so, come closer to understanding how astonishingly complex it is to experience anything at all. There is also a temporal dimension to consider. Your mind is constantly predicting the future and reconstructing the past. Memories are stitched together, expectations are calculated, and your moment-to-moment experience is filtered through this predictive lens. Depersonalization disrupts this flow, creating a feeling that time itself has become fluid or artificial. You may feel as though the present is a frozen frame, or that past and future are less real than the immediate sensory experience. This temporal dissonance amplifies the sensation of unreality, reinforcing the sense that both you and the world are constructed phenomena, operating according to patterns you are only now noticing. Even when the experience is brief, it can leave a lingering sense of awe or wonder. Imagine looking at a familiar landscape and suddenly noticing patterns, details, and interconnections that were invisible before. Depersonalization is, in a way, an extreme version of this perceptual shift. The familiar becomes strange, the ordinary extraordinary, and within that strangeness lies a deeper understanding. Reality is not a static object, but a dynamic, constantly generated experience. Consciousness is not merely a passenger in the world, it is the engine that produces it. Yet there is a delicate balance. Extended or chronic depersonalization can become distressing. The more detached you feel, the harder it can be to anchor yourself in daily life. This is where mindfulness and grounding techniques intersect with philosophy. By focusing on tangible sensations, concrete actions, and the rhythm of your own breathing, you can maintain a connection to the self and the world, even when your mind flirts with the uncanny. Awareness does not have to be alienating. It can coexist with engagement, curiosity, and even delight. This interplay between the unsettling and the illuminating is a hallmark of consciousness itself. Depersonalization forces you to confront the limits of perception, the fragility of identity, and the provisional nature of reality. Simulation theory and existential philosophy provide frameworks to interpret the experience, while neuroscience explains the mechanisms behind it. Together, these perspectives transform what could be a purely frightening sensation into a portal for reflection. A chance to explore not just who you are, but what it means to exist, to perceive, and to be aware of your own awareness. In the modern era, the sensation that reality is somehow unreal, or that we are observing ourselves from a distance, is no longer confined to moments of trauma or acute stress. Our culture, technologies, and ways of interacting with the world increasingly nudge the mind toward the same strange territory that depersonalization, existential thought, and simulation theory explore. To understand why, we must examine the environments in which the mind constructs reality and how those environments shape, amplify, and sometimes distort the experience of self. Consider the way media shapes perception. Every day, we are exposed to an immense stream of images, sounds, and narratives. Social media feeds flood us with the curated lives of others. Movies and television present idealized or surreal versions of existence, and news cycles oscillate between extremes of crisis and spectacle. The constant engagement with alternate realities, both fictional and curated, subtly trains the brain to navigate multiple layers of real. We learn to interpret images as representations, performances as reflections, and posts as constructed identities. Over time, this constant translation between layers of perception may erode the intuitive, automatic sense that the world around us is unmediated and certain. Small glitches in this perception, moments when your brain fails to fully integrate sensory input, can produce fleeting but profound feelings of unreality. Digital technology compounds the effect. Virtual reality, augmented reality, and immersive video games simulate environments that are convincing enough to evoke physical and emotional responses. The brain reacts as though these environments are real. Heart rate increases during virtual danger, spatial awareness adapts to virtual architecture, and emotional states align with virtual narratives. Yet when the mind returns to ordinary reality, the contrast between the simulated and the real can leave a residue of disorientation. Colors may feel flatter, sounds less immediate, movements less precise. The more the mind inhabits multiple layers of constructed experience, the more it can notice the subtle constructedness of the waking world itself. For some, this heightened awareness manifests as depersonalization, or the eerie sense that the world is a simulation. Modern work and lifestyle patterns also encourage dissociation. Consider the constant multitasking, the flow of notifications, and the pressure to be on for digital audiences. The mind is perpetually engaged in translating sensory input into actionable decisions, while simultaneously evaluating social feedback, generating self-presentation, and navigating abstract goals. In such an environment, the self can fragment into multiple layers: the professional self, the curated social self, the online persona, the internal self that observes all of these. Each layer demands attention, yet the brain has a limited capacity for integration. When cognitive load exceeds that capacity, the mind can temporarily disengage from the immediacy of embodied experience. You may feel as though you are watching yourself move through the day, thinking your thoughts but not fully inhabiting them. The sensation can be unnerving, yet it is fundamentally a byproduct of how the mind manages complexity. There is also the role of information saturation. The human brain evolved to interpret a certain scale and pace of sensory input. When exposed to an endless cascade of data, both trivial and profound, the mind must filter aggressively, prioritizing some signals while ignoring others. This filtering process is not perfect, and when it falters, the familiar world can appear distorted. Repetition, abstraction, and constant reinterpretation of stimuli create cognitive gaps that manifest as depersonalization-like experiences. The mind is attempting to reconcile the enormity of information with the need for coherent selfhood. Inevitably, some moments feel unreal. Cultural narratives about identity and existence amplify these effects. From childhood, we are taught stories of selfhood, reality, and purpose. Literature, film, and philosophy present models of consciousness and existence, some grounded in realism, others in surrealism or abstraction. When these narratives collide with personal experience, they can produce subtle cognitive dissonance. You may begin to question whether your inner life corresponds fully with the outer world, or whether the sense of I you inhabit is merely one version of many possible selves. Art, philosophy, and media do not cause depersonalization, but they shape the conceptual framework in which it arises, giving language, metaphor, and context to the strange sensations of unreality. Technology also creates environments that simulate social interaction. Consider text-based communication, social media, and online forums. In these spaces, responses are delayed. Feedback is abstract, and cues are minimal. The brain interprets these interactions differently from in-person experiences, sometimes creating subtle disconnections between intention, action, and outcome. Over time, habitual navigation of such spaces can amplify the sense that direct, embodied interaction is itself mediated or unreal. You may find yourself stepping back from the performance of online life and observing it with a strange detachment, a mild echo of depersonalization. The modern obsession with measurement, quantification, and optimization contributes as well. Fitness apps track every heartbeat and movement. Work platforms quantify productivity in dashboards. Social media tallies likes, shares, and impressions. Consciousness, long accustomed to qualitative perception, now encounters a world that reduces experience to numbers and patterns. When perception is constantly reframed as data, the immediacy of living can seem filtered, mediated, or artificial. Your awareness of self becomes layered with metrics and representations, and the mind occasionally steps outside the normal flow to observe these layers, producing sensations of unreality. Even architecture and urban design influence consciousness. Open-plan offices, artificial lighting, and highly controlled urban environments subtly alter sensory input. Human perception evolved in natural landscapes with irregular patterns, variable light, and tactile richness. When the brain operates in environments with repetitive or artificial stimuli, it may struggle to anchor perception, occasionally producing the sense that the world is flatter, slower, or more constructed than it truly is. These subtle environmental factors interact with stress, fatigue, and cognitive load to heighten the probability of depersonalization or fleeting unreality. Cultural emphasis on achievement and self-definition can deepen existential unease. In societies where value is tightly linked to productivity, visibility, and measurable success, people frequently evaluate their existence against external metrics. When one's inner experience does not align with external achievements, a gap emerges, a space where consciousness notices its own fragility. Depersonalization can arise in this space, not as pathology, but as the mind's response to misalignment between internal perception and external expectation. You feel unreal because the narrative you have constructed about yourself does not fully match the flow of life you inhabit. Interestingly, these technological and cultural pressures intersect with the timeless philosophical questions we explored earlier. The mind is repeatedly confronted with the idea that reality is layered, mediated, and constructed. Simulation theory, once abstract, becomes intuitively plausible. The brain experiences a daily sequence of mediated environments, constructed identities, and artificial feedback. In these circumstances, brief experiences of unreality may feel less like glitches and more like acknowledgements of truth. The mind is aware of its own modeling, the brain recognizes its predictive architecture, and consciousness senses the simulation it continuously generates. Yet there is also resilience embedded in the human mind. While technology, media, and culture can amplify depersonalization-like experiences, they also provide opportunities for integration. Awareness of the constructed nature of experience can foster mindfulness, reflection, and creativity. The very factors that challenge the sense of reality can also cultivate an appreciation for perception itself. Noticing the artificiality of certain experiences allows the mind to anchor more deliberately in others. The tactile texture of objects, the rhythm of breath, the nuances of human interaction. In a world of simulations, conscious presence becomes a subtle but profound act of grounding. The modern condition also encourages reinterpretation of traditional depersonalization triggers, where stress, trauma, or fatigue once primarily caused fleeting unreality. Digital saturation, multi-layered identities, and immersive media now create additional entry points. Anxiety about being off-screen, fatigue from information overload, and subtle sensory dissonances all interact with underlying neurological mechanisms to produce the same eerie sensations. In this sense, depersonalization is not only a psychological or neurological phenomenon, it is also cultural, a response to the ways we construct, mediate, and inhabit our environments. Despite the complexity, the underlying principle remains consistent. Consciousness is a delicate system, generating a coherent sense of self and reality by integrating countless streams of sensory, emotional, and cognitive input. When the flow is disrupted by stress, digital immersion, cultural pressure, or neurological variance, the mind temporarily observes itself from the outside. You feel unreal, not because you are broken, but because the mind is revealing the subtle machinery behind lived experience. And within that revelation lies an opportunity. Each moment of depersonalization or existential unease invites reflection on the nature of self, the construction of reality, and the ways culture and technology shape consciousness. Awareness of these influences allows you to navigate modern life more deliberately, to engage with media, technology, and social structures consciously, and to recognize the extraordinary intricacy of the mind that produces every experience. Ultimately, the modern amplification of unreality is both a challenge and an invitation. It challenges us to maintain grounding in a world increasingly mediated and abstracted, and it invites us to witness the mind's construction of reality with curiosity and wonder. The experience of depersonalization in this context becomes more than a symptom. It becomes a lens through which the human condition is revealed, a reminder that consciousness, while fragile, is capable of extraordinary insight and awareness. Memory is one of the most intimate architects of our sense of reality. It shapes who we think we are, how we interpret the world, and even how we inhabit the present moment. Yet memory is not a flawless record of events. It is a reconstruction, a continuously revised simulation built from fragments of experience, emotion, and imagination. When depersonalization occurs, or when existential unease creeps in, this reconstruction process can itself feel unreliable. leaving the mind adrift in a world that suddenly seems unreal. Think of memory as a network of overlapping tapestries. Each thread represents a moment, a sensation, a choice, or a relationship. Most of the time, these threads weave seamlessly into a coherent narrative. You are a person with a history, a body, and a mind, moving through a world that seems solid and continuous. But memory is fragile. It is susceptible to distortion, suggestion, and reinterpretation. Over time, details fade, emotional coloring shifts, and events are remembered differently than they occurred. In extreme cases, or even during ordinary moments of introspection, the brain may detect inconsistencies in this narrative. The resulting dissonance, when your recollections do not fully align with present perception, can evoke the eerie feeling that both the past and the self are somehow less real than you assume. This fragility of memory ties directly to the sensation of depersonalization. When the brain integrates sensory input to create a coherent sense of self, it draws upon both immediate perception and stored memory. Disruption in either source, whether through stress, fatigue, trauma, or neurological variants, can produce the unsettling awareness that the continuity of self is a delicate construction. You may feel as though your life is a series of snapshots rather than a flowing stream, that your body is moving through a story you only partially remember, or that your thoughts and emotions are echoes of something distant. In these moments, the line between lived experience and reconstructed narrative blurs, and the world itself may feel faintly simulated. Identity, intimately linked with memory, plays a similar role in shaping reality. The I you inhabit is not a fixed entity. It is a dynamic synthesis of roles, relationships, and perceptions, continuously updated as you interact with the environment. You are at once your childhood self, your present self, your imagined future self, and the self perceived by others. Each of these versions exists in the mind as a pattern of memory, expectation, and interpretation. When depersonalization arises, the boundaries between these selves can temporarily dissolve, leaving you feeling like a ghost inhabiting multiple narratives simultaneously. The self that once felt anchored in the body and the present moment becomes more like a virtual construct, observable, malleable, and astonishingly complex. The temporal dimensions of memory amplify this sensation. Our sense of continuity relies heavily on the sequencing of events. We remember yesterday, anticipate tomorrow, and navigate today in relation to both. Depersonalization can create a subtle mismatch between internal memory and immediate perception. Events from the past may feel distant or dreamlike, while moments unfolding now may seem oddly detached. The brain's simulation of time, normally seamless, becomes glitchy. This temporal dissonance contributes to the unsettling impression that reality itself is a projection, a model, or even a program that the mind is running, but only partially perceiving. Interestingly, trauma has a particularly profound effect on memory and the sense of reality. When the brain encounters overwhelming stress, it can alter the storage and retrieval of memories. Traumatic experiences may become fragmented, emotionally muted, or hypersalient, depending on how the nervous system copes. These altered memories do not simply fade, they influence ongoing perception, shaping how the present is interpreted and experienced. Depersonalization, in these contexts, can function as a protective mechanism. By creating distance from immediate perception or emotional intensity, the mind shields itself from full immersion in a destabilizing reality. Yet this same protective mechanism also accentuates the sense that the self and the world are unreal. Memory's role in depersonalization extends beyond trauma. Everyday memory, shaped by language, culture, and narrative, can produce subtle distortions. When you recall a conversation or relive an event, your mind fills gaps with assumptions, inferences, or imagined details. Over time, these reconstructions can diverge from the original experience, creating a parallel version of your own history. In moments of depersonalization, the mind may recognize this divergence more acutely, heightening the sense that both personal identity and external reality are constructs, delicately assembled and never fully verifiable. Simulation theory resonates deeply with this dynamic. If consciousness is understood as a continuous model of reality, memory is a crucial input in that model. The brain integrates sensory data, temporal sequences, and narrative reconstruction to create a coherent virtual environment. Depersonalization can be thought of as a moment when the simulation temporarily exposes its scaffolding. Memory may not align with perception, identity may feel fragmented, and the seamless flow of selfhood falters. You are aware of being inside a model, yet you cannot fully step outside it. The experience is disorienting precisely because it is intimate and unavoidable. You are observing the mechanics of your own consciousness from within, a phenomenon no external observer could replicate. Language and memory are intertwined in ways that further complicate perception. Memories are encoded not only as raw sensations, but also as linguistic representations. When the brain retrieves them, it reconstructs these experiences, in part using narrative, metaphor, and symbolic structures. During depersonalization, this reconstruction process can feel alien. Words may fail to capture the immediacy of perception, sentences may echo rather than embody experience, and thought itself may appear as a series of abstract patterns rather than lived reality. This linguistic mediation contributes to the sense that the self is being observed rather than inhabiting the world directly. Interestingly, creative and artistic practices exploit this same mechanism. Writers, painters, musicians, and performers often manipulate memory, narrative, and perception to evoke a sense of strangeness or heightened awareness. In a painting, a familiar landscape may be rendered with impossible angles. In music, time may be stretched or compressed. In literature, memory may unfold non-linearly. Depersonalization, in a way, mirrors these artistic processes. The mind experiments with its own perception, temporarily dislocating the self from ordinary experience. For some, these episodes can be terrifying. For others, they are a window into the extraordinary plasticity of consciousness. Memory's interaction with emotion further shapes the perception of reality. Emotional salience enhances memory consolidation. Intensely felt experiences are encoded more vividly, while mundane moments fade. Depersonalization often dulls emotional response, creating a subtle mismatch between memory and current affect. A joyful memory may feel distant or muted. A frightening event may feel oddly dissociated, and ordinary sensations may appear flattened. This emotional filtering amplifies the uncanny quality of reality. Not only does the world feel detached, but the internal emotional landscape, which normally anchors perception, becomes unreliable. Social memory, too, plays a significant role. We remember ourselves not only through our own perception, but also through the perspectives of others, family, friends, colleagues, even strangers. These externalized memories, how others describe us, react to us, or perceive us, interweave with our internal sense of identity. In depersonalization, the brain may accentuate the discrepancy between internal self-models and perceived external representations. You may feel like a character in someone else's memory, or a projection of collective expectation rather than a fully embodied, autonomous self. This social dimension intensifies the sensation that reality itself is mediated, filtered, or unreal. There is also a neurochemical component intertwined with memory and depersonalization. Neurotransmitters like glutamate, serotonin, and dopamine influence both memory formation and the perception of self. Fluctuations in these chemicals, due to stress, sleep deprivation, or neurological variants can alter the brain's capacity to integrate past and present, to merge sensory input with recollection, or to anchor emotional experience in bodily awareness. Even minor shifts can produce subtle but persistent feelings of unreality. When memory, emotion, and perception misalign, the mind momentarily reveals the scaffolding behind ordinary life, exposing the fragility of consciousness itself. This interplay between memory, identity, and depersonalization explains why the experience is often simultaneously disorienting and illuminating. On one hand, you may feel lost, detached, or even terrified by the sense that life is unreal. On the other hand, you gain an intimate glimpse of consciousness in action, a dynamic, continuously updated simulation integrating sensory input, temporal sequencing, narrative reconstruction, and social context. The world and self appear artificial, not because they are false, but because the machinery that produces them is momentarily visible. You witness the architecture of existence, and in that visibility lies both vulnerability and insight. Finally, memory provides a pathway back to grounding. By deliberately engaging with recollection, you can reconnect with selfhood and reality. Focusing on detailed sensory memories, tracing of emotional sequences, or revisiting personal narratives can anchor the mind in continuity. Even when the world feels unreal, memory serves as a bridge. It links the present to past experience, anchors the self in narrative continuity, and stabilizes perception. Consciousness, even when temporarily dislocated, can find its way back to coherence through careful attention to memory and identity. In this way, depersonalization, existential unease, and the sensation of unreality are not just disruptions, they are revelations. They expose the hidden processes by which memory and identity construct reality, highlighting the extraordinary complexity of consciousness. By observing these mechanisms, you glimpse the intricate interplay of brain, emotion, and narrative that produces every experience, every perception, and every moment of selfhood. You feel unreal, yet in feeling unreal, you are engaging with one of the most profound truths of existence: that being conscious is not a static state, but a dynamic simulation continuously reconstructed from memory, identity, and perception. The mind does not exist in isolation. Consciousness, memory, and identity are deeply intertwined with the body that houses them. When we explore depersonalization, the sensation that we are unreal or detached, we must recognize that the body is both anchor and interface. It is the primary means by which the brain interprets reality, and when that interpretation falters, the sense of unreality can intensify. Understanding embodiment, then, is central to understanding why depersonalization occurs, and how moments of dissociation can be both unsettling and illuminating. Our body constantly sends signals to the brain, a continuous stream of sensory and interoceptive information. Interoception refers to the perception of internal bodily states. Heart rate, breathing, temperature, gut sensations, and even subtle hormonal shifts. These signals create the feeling of being alive, of existing as a unified organism in space. When interoception is precise and integrated, the sense of self feels anchored. Emotions are vivid, movement feels fluid, and perception is coherent. But when interoceptive input is disrupted by stress, fatigue, trauma, or neurological factors, the mind may interpret the body as distant, strange, or even partially absent. You may feel as though your heart is beating, but not as if it belongs to you. Your limbs move, but not as if controlled by you. This subtle detachment can cascade into a full sensation of unreality, making both body and world feel like a simulation. The somatosensory system, responsible for touch, proprioception, and spatial awareness, plays a similarly critical role. Our brains continuously integrate feedback from muscles, joints, and skin to create a sense of physical presence. When this system is disrupted, for example, through overstimulation, lack of movement, or neurological variance, the sense of owning a body weakens. Movements may feel automatic, gestures hollow, and orientation in space uncertain. Depersonalization often manifests in these moments as an eerie duality. You are moving through space, yet simultaneously observing your own motions as if you are an outsider. This sensation highlights the remarkable complexity of embodiment. The brain is generating a real-time model of the body, and when that model falters, consciousness becomes acutely aware of its own construction. Stress and trauma further complicate this relationship between body and mind. In high-stress situations, the body's fight or flight system activates, flooding the nervous system with cortisol, adrenaline, and other stress hormones. This heightened physiological state can temporarily suppress sensory integration in favor of survival-focused processing. Movement, perception, and attention are optimized for immediate threat response, rather than continuous, coherent self-awareness. For some, this physiological shift manifests as depersonalization. The body feels alien, emotions are muted, and perception of the external world becomes filtered or distant. In this sense, the sensation of unreality is a protective mechanism, a buffer that allows the mind to endure overwhelming stimuli. Breathing offers a profound window into the interplay of body and consciousness. Breath is unique because it is both automatic and consciously controllable. The rhythm of inhalation and exhalation provides a continuous signal to the brain about bodily state. Focusing on the breath can restore a sense of grounding when depersonalization occurs, reminding the mind that you inhabit a body that exists in space and time. Conversely, shallow or irregular breathing, common during anxiety, fatigue, or trauma, can exacerbate the feeling of detachment. The body's feedback loop is disrupted, and the brain interprets the diminished interoceptive signals as a loss of reality. Techniques that restore natural breathing patterns are remarkably effective at re-establishing presence and countering unreality, highlighting the intimate link between physiology and consciousness. Movement and touch also play crucial roles in anchoring the mind. Walking, running, or stretching engages the proprioceptive system, reinforcing the brain's internal model of the body in space. Physical contact, whether with another person or with the environment, reinforces the tangible nature of experience. In depersonalization, these cues may feel muted, but they remain essential pathways back to grounding. Deliberate attention to sensation, feeling the texture of fabric, the weight of an object, or the warmth of sunlight, helps the mind reconcile perception with reality. These embodied practices demonstrate that unreality is not absolute. It is a temporary state that can be mitigated by reconnecting with the body. The neurological basis of embodiment provides further insight. The brain's integration of sensory input from the body relies on complex networks involving the parietal lobe, the insula, and the temporoparietal junction. The parietal lobe synthesizes tactile and spatial information, creating a coherent model of bodily position. The insula processes interoceptive signals, contributing to self-awareness and emotional experience. The temporoparietal junction integrates multisensory input to generate a sense of agency, an understanding that your actions originate from your own will. Disruption in any of these areas, whether due to fatigue, stress, or neurological variation, can produce depersonalization. The mind notices the gap and, in doing so, amplifies the feeling of unreality. Interestingly, altered states of consciousness, such as those induced by meditation, sensory deprivation, or certain psychedelic experiences, can deliberately manipulate these embodied signals. practitioners often report sensations similar to depersonalization: floating, observing the self from outside, or perceiving the body as unreal. In these contexts, the experience is intentional and often enlightening rather than distressing. The brain's usual simulation of reality is deliberately loosened, revealing the processes that normally go unnoticed. Depersonalization in everyday life may represent a brief, unintentional glimpse of the same underlying architecture. Consciousness detecting the mechanisms that generate the body and self. The body is also a temporal anchor. Rhythms such as heartbeat, breathing, and walking provide a continuous temporal reference. Depersonalization often distorts time perception, making seconds stretch or compress, moments feel frozen, or memory sequences lose continuity. Physical rhythms, however, offer a counterbalance. Feeling your heartbeat, coordinating movement with breath, or engaging in repetitive tasks like walking or typing reinforces the continuity of self. By aligning the mind with the body's inherent temporal patterns, you restore coherence and re-anchor consciousness in the present. Nutrition, sleep, and general health further influence the brain-body connection. Fatigue, dehydration, or nutritional deficiencies subtly alter neural function, impacting interoception, emotional regulation, and sensory integration. These factors increase susceptibility to depersonalization. A body deprived of adequate support provides weaker feedback to the mind, and consciousness notices the mismatch. Simple interventions, hydration, rest, gentle movement, can strengthen bodily signals and reduce feelings of unreality. This emphasizes the practical importance of embodiment. The mind's coherence depends on the body's consistency and vitality. Social embodiment also matters. The physical presence of others, shared gaze, touch, and synchronized movement can reinforce self-perception. Human brains are attuned to social cues, and interacting in person provides constant feedback that you exist within a shared reality. Depersonalization often heightens social anxiety because it disrupts the perception of this feedback. Faces may appear distant, voices muted, gestures alien. Awareness of this dynamic can guide strategies to restore grounding. Intentional, embodied interaction with others reinforces the brain's model of reality and mitigates the sensation of being unreal. Technology again plays a dual role in embodiment. Virtual interactions, while useful, reduce physical feedback. Touch, spatial orientation, and nonverbal cues are limited or absent. Extended immersion in virtual or digital spaces can weaken the brain's habitual reinforcement of embodiment, subtly increasing the likelihood of depersonalization or derealization. The mind becomes acutely aware of its own simulations, noticing the absence of physical feedback. Reintegrating with the tangible physical world through walking outdoors, handling objects, or engaging in movement is crucial for restoring grounded experience. The interplay between body and mind also explains why grounding techniques are effective. Simple strategies like pressing feet into the floor, holding an object, or focusing on sensory details provide immediate interoceptive and proprioceptive feedback. These signals reassure the brain that the body exists, is controlled, and occupies space. Grounding transforms depersonalization from a state of helpless observation into an active engagement with reality. The uncanny sensation of unreality does not vanish entirely, but it becomes manageable, integrated into consciousness rather than overwhelming it. Embodiment also reveals the remarkable adaptability of consciousness. The brain continuously recalibrates its model of the body in response to sensory input, memory, and expectation. Depersonalization, from this perspective, is not an error, but a temporary recalibration, a moment when the brain detects discrepancies between expected and actual bodily input. The sensation is uncomfortable, precisely because it highlights the precision with which consciousness constructs reality. By paying attention to the body, you participate in the recalibration process, restoring coherence and reinforcing the illusion, paradoxically, the constructedness of normalcy. Finally, embodiment connects with the existential dimensions of unreality. Depersonalization often brings awareness of mortality, the contingency of identity, and the fragility of perception. The body is a tangible anchor in the face of these abstractions. Feeling the weight of limbs, the rhythm of breath, or the texture of surfaces reminds consciousness that existence is not merely a cognitive or narrative construct, but a lived physical phenomenon. The strange sensation of unreality, then, can serve as a teacher. It points to the subtle scaffolding of consciousness while offering a pathway back to grounded, embodied awareness. In summary, the body is the primary lens through which consciousness perceives itself and the world. Depersonalization arises when interoception, proprioception, or temporal and social cues falter, creating a temporary fracture in the sense of self. Yet the body also provides the means of restoration. Attention to movement, touch, rhythm, and sensory detail reconnects the mind with its physical reality, bridging the gap between fragmented perception and coherent experience. In this way, the uncanny sensations of unreality become both a signal and an opportunity, a signal of the brain's remarkable complexity and an opportunity to engage consciously with the extraordinary machinery of embodiment. When you examine depersonalization, memory, and embodiment, a larger question emerges. What is reality itself? Why does the world sometimes feel unreal? And why does consciousness occasionally flicker with the awareness that it may be observing a construct rather than experiencing the raw world? Philosophers, physicists, and cognitive scientists have all grappled with this question, often arriving at the unsettling suggestion that reality, as we perceive it, may be less absolute than it seems. Depersonalization, then, may not simply be a glitch of the mind, but a subtle invitation to explore the architecture of consciousness and the nature of existence itself. Simulation theory provides a particularly compelling framework. Proposed in modern philosophical discourse by thinkers like Nick Bostrom, it suggests that what we experience as reality could, in principle, be a sophisticated simulation generated by an advanced intelligence. At first glance, this may seem purely speculative, yet the theory resonates deeply with depersonalization because it mirrors the lived sensation. You are aware of existence, yet simultaneously perceive yourself as detached, as though observing from within a constructed environment. Moments of depersonalization echo the hypothetical experience of a simulated consciousness, catching glimpses of its own framework, noticing the patterns and processes that usually remain invisible. The mind itself functions like a real-time simulator. Neuroscience has revealed that perception is not a passive process, but an active construction. The brain continuously predicts sensory input, compares it with incoming data, and generates a coherent model of reality. Memory, embodiment, and attention are all integrated into this model. Normally, this simulation is seamless. The world feels immediate and continuous. But depersonalization exposes the seams. You perceive the system observing itself. Thoughts feel like outputs, movements like pre-programmed sequences, and sensations like rendered data. The uncanny quality of unreality arises because the brain's predictive model is simultaneously operating and being scrutinized by consciousness. You are both the simulation and the observer of the simulation. Quantum physics further complicates our understanding of reality. At microscopic scales, particles behave probabilistically rather than deterministically, existing in multiple states until observed. While the macroscopic world appears stable, some interpretations, such as the Copenhagen interpretation, suggest that observation itself plays a fundamental role in determining reality. If consciousness interacts with or collapses potential states into concrete experience, then perception and existence are inseparable. Depersonalization, in this slide, could be understood as a moment when the observer temporarily detaches from the process of reality collapse. The brain notices the machinery of perception itself, revealing the astonishing possibility that what is real is contingent upon awareness. The familiar world flickers, briefly appearing like a projection, because consciousness is both witness and participant. Philosophical skepticism offers another lens. Descartes famously asked, "How do I know that anything is real?" He imagined a powerful deceiver capable of presenting an illusory world, convincing him that all perception is false. While few of us live with a malevolent deceiver, the thought experiment underscores a central point. Perception is inherently interpretive. The brain constructs models of reality based on sensory input, prior knowledge, and expectation. Depersonalization brings this construction into awareness. You see the world not simply as it is, but as the mind has generated it. Colors, sounds, and sensations remain, yet the seamless integration that normally convinces you of reality falters. You are momentarily a philosopher, a neuroscientist, and a dreamer, all observing the process of existence in action. The uncanny experience of unreality also aligns with Eastern philosophies. In traditions such as Advaita Vedanta or certain schools of Buddhism, the self is considered a fluid, impermanent phenomenon. Consciousness is understood as observing patterns of experience rather than inhabiting a fixed entity. Depersonalization mirrors these teachings. The sense of being unreal is not a deficit, but a glimpse into the impermanence and constructed nature of the self. The mind, when unanchored from habitual identification, perceives the world as process rather than object, experience rather than substance. In this context, depersonalization can be reframed as an insight rather than a symptom, a fleeting intuition of consciousness operating outside ordinary constraints. Simulation theory and philosophy intersect beautifully with depersonalization's lived experience. In both, there is a duality: awareness of being a participant and awareness of being an observer. You are inside the system, yet you notice its operations. Your memories, bodily sensations, and actions appear as outputs, and reality itself seems provisional. This dual awareness is uncomfortable because it conflicts with the brain's default assumption of seamless immersion, but it is also profoundly informative. It demonstrates that consciousness is a system capable of reflexivity, observing itself, evaluating its own processes, and glimpsing the mechanisms that construct reality. The subjective perception of time plays a central role in this interplay. In both depersonalization and certain thought experiments about simulated reality, the flow of time can feel distorted. Moments may stretch, compress, or fragment. Neuroscience suggests that these effects arise from disruptions in the brain's temporal integration networks. The hippocampus, cerebellum, and parietal lobes work together to provide a coherent sense of continuity. When continuity falters, consciousness perceives existence not as a smooth narrative, but as a series of snapshots or virtual frames. In depersonalization, this is experienced as being outside time, watching life as a sequence of events rather than participating fully in them. Simulation theory and certain quantum interpretations echo this. Reality itself may be updated in discrete units, with observation bridging one frame to the next. Depersonalization also highlights the distinction between subjective and objective reality. Science often assumes an objective world. Particles, forces, and measurable phenomena exist independently of observation. Conscious experience, however, is inherently subjective, filtered through perception, memory, and emotion. Depersonalization makes this subjectivity strikingly visible. The world feels like a projection, not because it is unreal, but because you are experiencing it through the lens of consciousness, which can occasionally detach, magnify, or distort its own input. You are simultaneously observer and observed, creating a tension that resonates with both simulation theory and philosophical skepticism. Emotion interacts with these processes in subtle ways. Emotional salience typically reinforces the sense of reality. Fear sharpens awareness, joy intensifies perception, and pain anchors consciousness to the body. In depersonalization, emotions often feel muted or detached, weakening the brain's normal reinforcement of reality. You perceive sights, sounds, and bodily sensations, yet they lack the usual, effective weight. This dampening amplifies the uncanny sensation, making reality appear not only constructed, but partially artificial. The mind in response becomes more attentive to its own mechanisms, heightening awareness of consciousness as a system rather than an immersive participant. The overlap between depersonalization and lucid dreaming is also notable. In lucid dreams, the dreamer recognizes the constructed nature of the dream while remaining immersed in it. Similarly, depersonalization involves recognition of the mind's construction of reality while awake. Both states provide insight into consciousness's capacity to simulate experience, manipulate perception, and generate coherent models of self and environment. They reveal that the sensation of unreality is not a failure of the mind, but a reflection of its extraordinary flexibility and predictive power. Even modern neuroscience experiments support the idea that consciousness constructs reality. Studies of virtual body illusions, mirror experiments, and sensory recalibration show that the brain can rapidly adapt its model of the self and the environment. When these models are manipulated through mismatched visual, tactile, or proprioceptive input, participants report feelings strikingly similar to depersonalization. Limbs feel alien, space feels distorted, and the sense of I weakens. These findings highlight that the mind's experience of reality is provisional, contingent on ongoing integration, and exquisitely sensitive to disruption. Depersonalization is a natural extension of this sensitivity, a temporary glimpse of the underlying machinery of consciousness. Simulation theory, philosophy, quantum mechanics, and neuroscience converge in depersonalization to reveal an astonishing truth. Reality, as perceived, is a complex, dynamically generated construct. Consciousness does not passively witness the world, it continuously models, predicts, and reconstructs it. Depersonalization is the moment when this reconstruction is partially revealed, when the mind steps outside its seamless operation and notices the architecture that normally remains invisible. It is a glimpse into the hidden processes that create perception, selfhood, and the very experience of being alive. Paradoxically, depersonalization is both alienating and enlightening. It can be disorienting, anxiety-inducing, or frightening, but it also provides a profound opportunity to reflect on the nature of consciousness. By observing the mind observing itself, you engage with questions that philosophers, scientists, and mystics have grappled with for centuries. What is real? What is self? How do memory, perception, and embodiment generate the experience of existence? In moments of unreality, these abstract questions become immediate, tangible, and deeply personal. In essence, depersonalization is an experiential interface with the mind's own machinery. It highlights the extraordinary complexity of consciousness, memory, embodiment, and perception. Simulation theory, quantum perspectives, and philosophical inquiry provide intellectual frameworks to interpret these sensations, but the experience itself is a direct encounter with the architecture of reality. You are both the observer and the observed, inside the model and noticing it simultaneously, witnessing the fragile, intricate, and astonishing construction that produces every moment of awareness. The sensation that you are not fully real can feel isolating, disorienting, and even frightening. Yet, as we have explored across the previous sections, these moments are also windows into the remarkable complexity of consciousness. Depersonalization, derealization, and existential unease reveal the machinery of perception, memory, embodiment, and selfhood. They remind us that reality is not a static or self-evident entity. It is a dynamic construction, continuously generated by the mind and interpreted through the body. To understand and navigate these experiences is to engage with the most fundamental question of human existence. What does it mean to be alive, aware, and real? First, let us reflect on the interconnectedness of the systems that produce these sensations. The brain continuously integrates sensory input from the environment and the body, constructs predictions about future events, and aligns these predictions with memory and expectation. The body provides feedback, grounding consciousness through proprioception, interoception, and embodied action. Memory, identity, and social context shape the narrative of self, guiding the mind in interpreting experience. Emotion amplifies salience, adding texture, urgency, and resonance. When these systems operate seamlessly, life feels continuous, coherent, and immediate. When they falter, even momentarily, the mind observes its own processes, producing the eerie sense that the world and even the self is unreal. Depersonalization, from this perspective, is not a failure of the mind. It is a natural consequence of consciousness observing itself. It is the system noticing its own operations, a glimpse behind the curtain at the mechanisms that ordinarily remain invisible. This realization transforms the sensation from a threat into an insight. You are not losing your grip on reality. You are experiencing the incredible subtlety and complexity of the system that constructs reality in real time. You are witnessing the predictive modeling of perception, the scaffolding of selfhood, and the simulation of experience, all functioning in an intricate, ongoing dance. Existential philosophy illuminates the significance of this experience. Human beings are uniquely capable of self-reflection. We are aware of our own awareness. This capacity produces profound opportunity and profound tension. It allows us to create, imagine, and conceptualize, but it also exposes us to questions of meaning, purpose, and reality itself. Depersonalization is, in some sense, consciousness experiencing its own reflexivity. When life feels unreal, you are encountering the limits and possibilities of human awareness, the edge of perception, and the fragile scaffolding that sustains the ordinary sense of existence. In that space, the uncanny and the sublime coexist. Simulation theory offers another lens through which to interpret depersonalization. If consciousness constructs a model of reality, integrating perception, memory, and prediction, then the uncanny sensation of unreality is exactly what one might expect when the system briefly becomes self-aware. You feel like an avatar in a simulation, not because you are, but because the mind is temporarily observing the processes by which it generates the sense of self and environment. Simulation theory, philosophy, and neuroscience converge here. They suggest that the uncanny is not an error, but an exposure of the very architecture of consciousness. The flickering sensation of unreality is a brief, valuable insight into the extraordinary machinery of experience. Memory, identity, and narrative play essential roles in both producing and resolving these experiences. When past experiences, recollections, or social feedback diverge from present perception, the mind may detect inconsistency, triggering depersonalization. Yet memory is also the anchor that restores coherence. By revisiting detailed recollections, attending to sensory specifics, and reconnecting with narratives of self, you provide the mind with continuity. bridging the gap between fragmented perception and lived experience. Consciousness is malleable. It can experience unreality, reflect on it, and reintegrate. The process is not only survival-oriented, but also deeply informative. It teaches us how our brains assemble life moment by moment. Embodiment, once again, is central. The body is the interface between consciousness and the world. Sensory input, interoceptive signals, and physical movement anchor the mind in reality, providing continuous feedback that reinforces presence. Grounding techniques, touching objects, moving limbs, feeling textures, focusing on breath, strengthen this connection. Even subtle interventions, such as pressing feet against the floor, noticing the weight of clothing, or holding a warm object, reassert the body's reality. In depersonalization, the body simultaneously reveals vulnerability and offers restoration. The uncanny sensation is strongest when the system's predictive modeling falters. Grounding restores coherence, aligning perception, action, and memory. Emotion mediates this integration as well. Emotional salience reinforces presence. Joy, sorrow, fear, and love anchor consciousness in the flow of experience. Depersonalization often dampens emotion, reducing this natural anchoring. Mindful attention to affect, naming feelings, observing bodily responses, or engaging with emotionally meaningful experiences, can restore the mind's integration. Emotions are not merely reactions, they are signals from the body and memory that guide perception, reinforce coherence, and maintain the sense of reality. In this way, even when life feels unreal, the mind and body contain the tools to navigate, stabilize, and understand the experience. The interplay between consciousness, memory, embodiment, and perception has profound philosophical implications. Depersonalization is a lived demonstration of the mind's predictive and constructive capacities. It reveals that reality is not a simple external fact, but a continuous co-creation between brain, body, and environment. The uncanny sensation is therefore both informative and essential. It reminds us that existence is remarkable, that perception is a feat of integration, and that consciousness is simultaneously fragile and extraordinary. To experience unreality is to glimpse the scaffolding of life itself, a reminder of the delicate machinery that enables every moment of awareness. At the same time, modern environments amplify these sensations. Technology, digital interfaces, social media, and immersive media extend the mind's engagement with constructed realities. Information overload, mediated interaction, and the continuous blurring of personal and virtual identity heighten the probability of depersonalization. Yet these same environments also offer opportunities for reflection, creativity, and insight. By deliberately attending to embodiment, grounding in memory, and mindful perception, you can navigate moments of unreality without distress, using them as portals into understanding consciousness itself. Even the sensation of unreality carries aesthetic and contemplative value. Writers, artists, and philosophers have long recognized that stepping outside ordinary perception reveals subtleties invisible under normal immersion. Colors, textures, time, and selfhood all acquire a different hue when consciousness observes itself. Depersonalization, in this sense, is a natural form of heightened perception. The mind becomes both observer and object, perceiving its own operation as it unfolds. The eerie sensation is discomforting only because it violates habitual assumptions about reality, but it also reveals the extraordinary sophistication of the systems that generate experience. Reflection, curiosity, and acceptance provide practical ways to engage with depersonalization. Rather than resisting or fearing the sensation, one can approach it as information, a sign of the mind's complexity and sensitivity. Observing the body, reconnecting with memory, attending to emotional salience, and practicing grounded action help reintegrate perception and restore coherence. Philosophy, science, and contemplative practices converge here. They suggest that unreality is both a natural feature of consciousness and an opportunity for deeper understanding. By facing it without panic, the mind can learn about its own predictive modeling, the construction of selfhood, and the scaffolding of reality. Ultimately, the uncanny feeling of not being real is a testament to human consciousness. It illustrates the brain's predictive power, the body's grounding influence, and the delicate integration of memory, perception, and emotion. It connects directly with existential awareness, the realization that selfhood, identity, and reality are provisional, malleable, and continuously constructed. Rather than being a failure of the mind, it is a signal of its sophistication, an opportunity to witness the extraordinary machinery that produces lived experience. Even brief episodes carry profound lessons. They reveal that perception is provisional, reality is interpreted, and consciousness is both fragile and extraordinarily adaptive. They highlight the beauty of embodiment, the anchoring power of memory, and the delicate scaffolding of selfhood. By observing, grounding, and reflecting, you can navigate these sensations safely, transforming them from sources of fear into instruments of insight. In this sense, the feeling of unreality becomes not a threat, but a guide, pointing toward understanding, curiosity, and the remarkable nature of being alive. As we conclude, consider this: the uncanny sensation of depersonalization, the eerie impression that the self or world is not fully real, is neither arbitrary nor meaningless. It is a direct encounter with consciousness, memory, embodiment, and perception, exposing the scaffolding of reality in a way that ordinary life rarely permits. It reminds you that existence is a dynamic simulation, continuously constructed, richly layered, and astonishingly intricate. The moment may feel strange, but it is also profoundly human. A glimpse into the machinery of being, a reflection of the fragility and brilliance that makes consciousness possible. Feeling unreal, then, is not a loss. It is a revelation. It is consciousness observing itself, the mind perceiving its own operations, and the body signaling its presence. It is a reminder that life, perception, and selfhood are extraordinary feats of integration, continuously maintained by complex systems working in harmony. Even in the eerie detachment, you are profoundly alive, embedded in reality, and participating in one of the most astonishing phenomena imaginable: conscious experience. In this light, depersonalization, existential unease, and the fleeting sense of unreality are not threats, but invitations. They invite reflection, mindfulness, and appreciation. They reveal the delicate, beautiful construction of self and world. They remind you that the machinery of consciousness is both fragile and awe-inspiring, that the mind can simultaneously construct and observe, and that to feel unreal, even briefly, is to glimpse the extraordinary architecture of being.